From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Thank you for joining us. This is West Virginia Public Broadcasting Senate debate. We're joined by 4 of the 5 candidates that will be on the ballot this November. Joining us today is Bob Henry Baber, the Mountain Party's candidate for U.S. Senate. We're joined by Natalie Tennant, the Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate. Then Phil Hudok, he's the Constitution Party candidate, and John Buckley, who is the Libertarian running for Senate. Shelley Moore Capito, the Republican candidate, was invited to this forum tonight. There is no prompter, so I'm just making.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Welcome to West Virginia Public Broadcasting's debate between 4 of the 5 candidates on the ballot for a seat in the United States Senate. I'm Ashton Marra. Thank you for joining us. This hour-long debate will provide you with opening statements by the candidates, 8 questions with 1-minute answers, 2 opportunities for an open discussion of the issues, and the candidates' closing statements. In alphabetical order, the candidates are Bob Henry Baber of Glenville in Gilmer County, representing the Mountain Party; John Buckley of Matthias in Hardy County, representing the Libertarian Party; Phil Hudok from Huttonsville in Randolph County with the Constitution Party; and Natalie Tennant of Charleston in Kanawha County from the Democratic Party. Republican Shelley Moore Capito declined an invitation to attend this debate due to her scheduling conflicts, but her campaign did send this statement. She says, "I'm pleased to have participated in the October 7th debate. While I had asked that all the candidates on the ballot be included in that debate, it was unfortunately the decision of the sponsors to exclude the third-party candidates. I sincerely regret that I am not able to participate in today's debate." Candidates, welcome. You have 1 minute for an opening statement. A drawing for speaking order was conducted before this broadcast, and we begin with Mr. Phil Hudok.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Public Radio, or Public Broadcasting, for hosting this in Ashton. The Constitution matters, and the people need to know the issues, the important issues, to make wise decisions. So being the 4th estate, you're doing the right thing. I'm chairman of the Constitution Party, and the Constitution does matter. We've had 17 wars in my lifetime since 1950, and we have a moral meltdown in this country. We were the greatest creditor nation, now we're the greatest debtor nation. And Alex de Tocqueville once said, America is the greatest because America is good, and if America ever ceases to be good, it will cease to be great. And that's the problem. We have a moral meltdown, retired public school teacher, and I've taken tough stands, and it's cost me my job at one point, but I fought, and luckily I prevailed. I was blessed, and I want to serve the public.
Mr. Hudok, thank you very much. Mr. Baber, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. The premise of my campaign is the profound love I have for the people of West Virginia and the mountains of West Virginia as God made them, with clean air and clean water. That being said, I'm for raising the minimum wage to $10 per hour and equal pay for women. I support green jobs and entrepreneurship, Pell Grants, and health care is a right. I do believe in federal fiscal responsibility. I've run a city, the city of Richwood, West Virginia. I've been a single father and had to make it on $20,000 a year with 3 kids, so I know what it's like to struggle. The Mountain Party supports regulation of fracking, a phased-out end to mountaintop removal as quickly as possible with job training, support of gay marriage, taxing and regulation of marijuana, and the undoing of Citizens United.
And we'll talk about some of those issues. Thank you. Secretary Tennant, your 1 minute.
Thank you, Ashton. Thank you, everyone here and those tuning in also. I've spent the past year traveling all 55 counties to hear from you. And I have put forward a 4-part plan to create jobs based on those ideas. And my first part, it starts with energy. The United Mine Workers of America endorsed me because the coal miners trust that I will help to save their jobs and protect their jobs. Number 2, from 3D printing to bio-nanotechnology, we are developing the most cutting-edge technology in the country right here in West Virginia. And I see the promise and possibility all across this great state, but I know that none of it is really possible unless we invest in our greatest resource, and that is our people. And I will work to end tax breaks for companies that ship their jobs overseas. I will vote for a minimum wage increase and vote and fight for equal pay for equal work. That's why my 3rd part is education, and my 4th part focuses on drug abuse and combating the crisis that we have here in this country, in this state.
Secretary, thank you. Mr. Buckley.
Thank you very much. My name is John Buckley. I'm the Libertarian Party candidate running for United States Senate. And I'd like to commend Public Broadcasting for hosting this 2nd debate, although I think we all should have been invited into the 1st debate. And I'd also like to commend Natalie Tennant for joining us here in this program. That makes 4 of the 5 candidates on the ballot running for United States Senate. Missing in action, Shelley Capito. I think it's shameful and somewhat hypocritical, given her statements in favor of public debates, for her to miss this forum. I think it's certainly contemptuous of the public not to participate in this important debate that we're having today. But so be it. Of the 5 candidates running for the United States Senate, I'm the only candidate running on a consistent platform of small government and individual liberty. Individual liberty, both economic and personal. To me, the common theme of the issues facing America today is too much government. The bigger the government, the less liberty we have to solve our own problems, our families, help our communities, and address the problems, because we know better than the experts in Washington, D.C. how to deal with the problems that we face in West Virginia. My Republican opponent is a big government, big business type of Republican, what I consider to be crony capitalism, whereas I'm a Ronald Reagan small
Mr.
government
Buckley, I'm
fan.
sorry, that's your time. Thank you.
Thank you very
We're
much.
going to move next to a round of 4 questions. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. Our first question is one that we received from a viewer here in Charleston, and they write, after the January 9th chemical spill, what steps on the federal level will you take to ensure such an event never occurs? We start with Mr. Hudok.
I think that's a state problem more than a federal problem. And I agree with John Buckley that the federal government is involved. Our problems really emanate from Washington. Most of the problems in West Virginia, I believe, is an overreaching a violation of the 10th Amendment. And so I would like to see the state handle the problems in the state. When the federal government gets involved, I don't think they have necessarily the best interest and do the state's justice. So I feel this is a state issue as far as the EPA state issue. EPA should, the State Environmental Protection Agency should be dealing with this problem.
Mr. Buckley, you're
Yes,
next.
I think it's a state issue. If we had better, more enforceable tort laws, laws dealing with the proper capitalization of businesses, greater insurance requirements, so they can't simply escape the responsibility of their negligence through the easy out of bankruptcy, we would do better at regulating problems like that. The more we get regulation at the federal level, the more the special interests themselves capture the regulatory industries, what's called regulatory capture. And that does not work to the advantage of the public. I think we can focus on this issue more at the state level, but obviously we need to do more.
Okay. Mr. Baber.
You know, I bumped into a lady on the campaign trail that said, in God we trust, all others we scrutinize. I think that applies in this case. I was shocked by the near total lack of response of the Republicans in West Virginia, who basically said nothing for 10 or 12 days because it was a coal cleaning agent and they didn't want to say anything that sounded like it might be against coal. I actually am a federalist. I do not oppose the federal government, and I think it's a problem that the feds need to solve. It's a national problem. It's not just a West Virginia problem, and I don't trust the West Virginia EPA as far as I can throw it.
Secretary Tennant, you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Ashton, and no doubt that there should have been more oversight. This should have never happened back on July 9th here in Charleston, that we have this type of leak. And I know what it was like. I was there when residents were standing on the front lines with their water jugs trying to get water, because obviously we couldn't use it, we couldn't drink it. And so I was standing with them. I stood up for the small businesses who were losing money because they had to close their businesses because they couldn't use water, and standing up for the minimum wage workers who, when they aren't working, they're not getting paid, so they weren't able to pay their bills. And I testified in front of the U.S. Senate and told our West Virginia story of what was happening and taking place. And I stood up and said that on the federal level, I would support the legislation that Senator Rockefeller and Senator Manchin had introduced that caused and required more oversights of above ground tanks. But we also have to remember that the rules are only as good as the oversight that takes place, and we can't be cutting corners. And certainly if this crisis taught us anything, is that we should not be putting profits over people.
Thank you very much. So let's move on now to some social issues. Mr. Buckley, we're rotating the order, so this question goes to you first. Given the events of the past week that have made it legal for same-sex couples across the state to begin to marry, do you believe West Virginia was right in allowing same-sex marriage, and do you agree with the practice? You have 1 minute.
Yeah, well, I think the courts made the decision final. There was no decision to be made after the federal courts ruled. I think it would have been better had the Supreme Court taken the issue and issued an explanatory decision. I do think there's an equal protection argument to be made in favor of same-sex marriage. On the other hand, I think it would have been much better had the state legislature had the gumption and the responsibility to address that issue itself, rather than deferring to federal judges to make law like that.
So you support same-sex marriage?
I think it's proper and fair, and I think it's a corollary and consistent with principles of small government. Let live and let live. Leave people alone. Everybody respects each other. Now the biggest issue, now that issue has been won by the gay community, is respecting the equal rights of the Christian community to adhere to their values and their principles and their morals without being pushed around. I think that is the next test of a permissive, free, live and let live society, is to respect everyone's principles.
Mr. Baber, you're next.
Yes, I was gratified that the Supreme Court finally listened to the Mountain Party and the Green Party of the United States and ruled in favor of gay marriage. Fair is fair, and I just can say that I think it's a step in the right direction, and I support it.
Secretary Tennant?
Yes, I support marriage equality as well, so it was the right decision. As a matter of fact, I have a policy, a personnel policy within the Secretary of State's office of no discrimination, the employee non-discrimination housing policy that takes place, because I, as anyone else, want to be treated fairly, and that's the way that I looked at this as I prayed over it, as I thought over it, that all should be treated fairly. And most certainly, I see where John is coming from too, and this is what I've said, that churches should not be forced to go against their doctrine, they should not be forced to go against their teaching.
Okay, Mr. Hudok.
No, I am for marriage of a man and a woman. State law still says it's a man and a woman. No Webster's Dictionary said marriage is instituted by God himself for the prevention of the promiscuous intercourse of the sexes. So I think the whole purpose of marriage was ordained and set up, a sacrament by God, and I think it's terrible that the courts are legislating. The legislature, like the U.S. legislature, has the lowest rating ever. It's single digits, and it's because the legislators are being trumped by judges who are legislating from the bench. And I think this is wrong.
Okay, thank you all for your discussion. Mr. Baber, the next question comes to you. West Virginia has a growing substance abuse problem that has been affected little by the efforts of state and local government to control it. State and federal government to control it, I should say. What, if anything, do you support being done on the federal level to combat drug abuse?
Well, I support national laws that would prohibit the proliferation of all these drugs. I understand that in West Virginia, a heavy lobbying campaign thwarted that effort. We know we're eat up with those kind of drugs in West Virginia and throughout the coal fields, actually. As the mayor of Richwood, I worried terribly about my own children falling prey to those kinds of drugs. Fortunately, they've all gone on and done better things in their life. I actually support, and the Mountain Party supports, the legalization of marijuana and the taxation of it, which would help with our national debt. Colorado has legalized marijuana. They have the lowest abuse of prescription drugs in the United States. I think there's a corollary there. And you can't legislate. I agree with John on live and let live. You can legislate all you want. You can fight the war on drugs. It's not going to work. Okay, so my time's up.
You have a few more seconds.
That's okay. I'll defer.
Secretary Tennant, you're next.
Well, no matter where I go, as I told you, I've traveled around all 55 counties, and as I talk about this, and first off, we have to make this an ongoing discussion, and that's what I found. It's not taking place as much here as it is in West Virginia as it is on the national level, and that's why I will bring it into focus as a United States Senator, because no matter where I go across the state, when I start talking about this crisis that is ripping our families apart, that is devastating our communities, I look around the room and I see people's heads shake yes. And then when I look a little closer, I see their eyes start watering, because so many West Virginians, so many Americans are touched by this, and that's why I've made it a cornerstone of my platform to address the drug abuse crisis. So what can we do on the federal level? As United States Senator, we need to put a stop to the FDA allowing drugs like Zohydro coming in and putting them on the shelves of pharmacies. We can't allow that. I understand that we have cancer patients who are in deep pain, and they should be given that under the care of a doctor directly or under a hospice care directly, but certainly we shouldn't have these high-powered drugs on the streets in our communities in West Virginia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hudok. There's open discussion, and you'll be able to add then. Mr. Hudok?
Yes, I think that there's a lot the federal government can do. Number one is secure our borders, and number two, for instance, let's take Afghanistan. After we went into Afghanistan, the production of heroin went way up, okay? During Vietnam, it was actually the government that was bringing drugs into the country in body bags. So there's a lot the government can do, and that is get out, police themselves, because they've done more damage by bringing drugs or allowing drugs to come into the country. And other than that, it's the states' rights. I'm for decriminalization of marijuana. And definitely hemp is a great thing that we should be using in West Virginia.
Mr. Buckley.
Thank you very much. I take a more comprehensive approach to the war on drugs. The problem is the war on drugs for decades has been a catastrophic and very expensive failure. We haven't ended the scourge of drug abuse. And one way to do that is to undercut the gangs and the international drug cartels overnight by legalizing the drugs. They'd be safer, the drugs would be purer, we could get people out of the shadows and address their health issue, not as a criminal issue. Help people, those who are in need, and solve all the other problems that are hurting the general public, the crime that's driven by people trying to get black market drugs, reduce the gangs, reduce the prisons, get rid of the legal precedents that have invaded private property of no-knock warrants and searches of people's homes unfairly. I think if we take a new approach to solve the problem, we can end the black market in drugs overnight. And that would be the approach. Decriminalization, medical marijuana, those are all excellent steps to take. But I think we ought to address the whole problem, which is we've made it profitable. Get rid of the profits, we reduce the incentive to push drugs on kids. And we solve the problem as a health issue, not a criminal issue.
Okay. Our last question for this round goes to you, Secretary Tennant, and then we'll go around the table. Another question from a viewer, from Chip in Charlestown. I think you're all familiar with the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision, which essentially allows corporations and unions to spend an unlimited amount of money on campaign ads for or against a candidate. Chip asks, do you believe Congress should rewrite campaign funding laws which would overturn that Supreme Court ruling?
Well, thank you, Chip, for that question. Yes, I do believe that there is too much money in campaigns, and yes, Congress should rewrite the campaign laws. And that's why I will go in as a U.S. Senator and help to overturn Citizens United, whether it be an amendment that was introduced by Senator Tester from Montana. I will lead and help be part of that, because there's too much money, and I don't believe that the corporations are people, and I believe that we need to overturn Citizens United.
Mr. Hudok, the question comes to you next.
Actually, I think it would be something that the states could take on, which would be a great responsibility, and that is to actually run the elections so that it would be fair and free to everyone, so that it wouldn't be a matter of how many signs are out, but issues, where venues like public broadcasting and the Press Association and Metro News, where they would actually offer equal time to all candidates to talk, to speak, to get the issues out, to be the fourth estate so the public would know the issues, and there wouldn't be any unfair advantage, monetary advantage to any particular candidate. It would be a fair, free election, but I think that's something that the state could take on. It would be the responsibility. It wouldn't cost that much. Probably not near as much as what's being spent right now on campaigns.
Mr. Buckley, the question comes to you next.
On that proposal for campaign finance reform, I say no. I believe in the First Amendment. I think we should have more robust political discussion and free speech and let everyone participate. The problem of the corruption in government that people point to all this money, the problem is really the concentration of power in government that makes business want to manipulate the levers of power to their own advantage. If we reduced government, we wouldn't have the capacity for that kind of corruption, and that kind of money would cease to flow. What's happening now is big interests are buying connections. They're buying a foot in the door in the halls of power. That's the corruption, and that's what we need to get rid of, not eviscerate the First Amendment.
Mr. Paper?
Yeah, I'm going to have to part company with John on that one, because we all know the Koch brothers are buying the United States of America, and big money is not free speech. Actually, it doesn't matter what laws Congress passes. We're going to have to pass an amendment to the Constitution to do this, because anything that Congress writes will be knocked down by the Supreme Court. West Virginia, I'm happy to say, is one state that's already come out with about 15 or 20 others for a constitutional amendment. This is the biggest campaign issue of all. I know it's not as sexy as some of the other ones, but actually big money is gutting democracy as we know it, and going forward it will continue to do so. People talk about the union's influence. I looked at the numbers. The Koch brothers have 10 times as much money as the unions to spend, and they are spending it. They're spending it here in West Virginia. They're spending it in Kentucky. They're in droves. And so to say that, oh, let everybody speak, well, if you've got millions and millions of dollars, you can speak a lot louder than if you have $10. That's just what it boils down to.
Thank you all for sharing your views. The open discussion period allows for 4 minutes of time for rebuttal or any follow-up that you may feel necessary after the first round of questions. Where would we like to start? Anyone have any rebuttal to anything?
You had something.
Well, I just had one little thing I wanted to say about the marijuana laws, and that is that I recently visited Colorado, where you can walk around sucking on, marijuana lollipops, and you can go to Ohio, where 50 grams will get you a speeding ticket, and then in West Virginia, if you have 5 grams, you're on your way to Flatwoods or one of the regional jails for a while. And that, agreeing with John, that is a complete and total waste of money, and it's national insanity. Put people in jail for a little bit of pot. May lose their jobs and their ability to support their families, but 2, we're paying for them to be in jail. So it's a catastrophe of immense proportions. I just wanted to say that.
Secretary, I think everybody at the table kind of shared their views on marijuana and legalizing marijuana and medical marijuana. Would you like to share your opinion on that?
Well, as I traveled the state and talked with law enforcement and how we're going to solve these drug problems, I'm focused on solving the drug problems. I don't want to add any more to the legalization at this point, because I think that we have, as Bob was talking about, we have an opportunity to learn and really study the what's taking place in Colorado and in Washington State, and I would like to look at that first. Now, I would be willing to discuss and take a look at medical marijuana, because we certainly don't want those who are in deep pain to suffer any more than they should, and if medical marijuana will help them, then that is an avenue that I certainly would look into at that point.
So, Mr. Hudok, you said something during the question about making elections fair and free to everyone. And I want to delve into that a little bit further. Does that mean public campaign financing?
Yes.
Do you believe in that?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell us a little bit more about why you feel that way?
Well, as John said, we have a system that's broken, and money, it's like, I spent most of my time getting on the ballot, and I don't have the money to make up for all that time that I'm getting petitions from people, whereas, there were millions of dollars that other people had. So, the problem is public access and getting your views out to the public. And so I think it should be fair. And the only way it could be fair is if everyone has the same resources. They may have different issues and everything, but if they have the same resources, then no one has an unfair advantage. And I think that's a government responsibility to make sure that there is no unfair advantage. And I'm sure the Secretary of State agrees that we should have no unfair advantages in the election of our representative.
Secretary, do you agree?
There is a process, Phil, that allows candidates to get on the ballot, such as you. Now, you're looking here at two parties, the Mountain Party and the Libertarian Party. And the Mountain Party has had that immediate access since the year 2000. And that came about because their gubernatorial candidate had and garnered at least 2% of the vote in the gubernatorial race, which then set in place that the Mountain Party now is a recognized party of West Virginia. The same with the Libertarian when they accomplished that in 2012. And so there is part of that process. And you're right, you have access to the ballot, and you were required to collect 7,000 votes as part of a nominating process. Right. I'm only here because I was nominated by my Democratic Party, and these gentlemen are only here because they were nominated as well.
Mr. Buckley hasn't gotten in on the conversation yet.
On public finance, gosh, I think that would be the horrible, worst, wrong direction to go. We want the government that's exhibited its efficiency and fairness by way of the IRS and the VA and other examples like that to take over public financing of campaigns. It would be a disaster, and believe me, we the little people would suffer the worst. On the point about medical marijuana, I want to make a larger point, and that is individual choice and freedom in a free society. What people consume on their own, whether it's a big gulp soda, a cigarette, or marijuana for their medical ills and things of that sort, in a free society should be their choice. If you're not hurting another person, the government should leave you alone. That is live and let live.
Mr. Buckley, thank you. That's our time. Let's move on to our second round of questions. Our first question this round comes to you, Mr. Hudok. Should younger generations in this country resign themselves to believing that there will not be Social Security or a Medicare system in place by the time they reach the retirement age?
I would certainly understand their concerns. The government is put the people something like $50,000 or $60,000 per person in debt, and if I ran my house the way the government runs the country, I would soon be out on the street. I do believe we have a problem. I don't believe the government should force someone into Social Security. I did belong, but I didn't have any choice. So it's kind of like the government's program for insurance in a way. And I don't think it should be forced. I think it should be an option. If someone wants some kind of a policy that they pay into for the future, fine. But for the government to force that, no, I'm against that. And so I think there should be other options.
Mr. Buckley.
I think, unfortunately, Social Security is a multi-decade-long Ponzi scheme, and the younger people today are suffering the consequences of that Ponzi scheme. And I was very surprised in the first debate, which three of us were not invited to. In that first debate, Congresswoman Capito completely ruled out any consideration of privatizing and personalizing Social Security accounts for younger people so they could build a nest egg that they could control and own and would be secure for their future. That is going to be one of the necessary steps to reform our entitlement system and allow younger people a safe and secure retirement. We need to go in that direction. I'm surprised she shut the door on that.
Mr. Baber.
Well, I hope youth will fight for Social Security. I know I am looking forward to getting it, and I actually find it really hard to imagine the federal government pulling the plug on that. I actually think that would cause a major social upheaval in the United States. People are used to having Social Security. It's a great thing. Many of our seniors would be living in poverty without it. And I hope along those lines that the youth will fight for a minimum wage. I hope they'll fight for universal health care, for reducing federal overspending on ridiculous nation building in the Middle East, which is sucking our country dry. We need to take care of ourselves back here at the United States. enough gallivanting around the world, playing policemen and trying to build nations that don't want to be built. So I think Social Security can be kept viable if we reprioritize our federal spending.
Secretary Tennant.
Well, there are a couple things, and John, I have to disagree that Congresswoman Capito, and I wish she were here, but she chose not to be here and to answer to the people of West Virginia.
It'd be nice to hear from her.
No, she has wanted to privatize Social Security and take our Social Security and put it in the hands of Wall Street so they could gamble away. Now, imagine if that would have happened in 2008 before with the crisis. There wouldn't have been that security. I will protect Social Security and Medicare. You ask, should our young folks be able to count on it? Yes, they should, with me as a United States Senator. And, you know, Social Security is really part of a three-legged stool when it comes to, it should be Social Security, it should be pensions and savings. It's part of a security area. And so that's why I will work to protect Social Security. And here's one way that we can shore up the Social Security Trust Fund, and that is by paying folks more than minimum wage and increasing the minimum wage, because they will then be paying more into the Social Security Trust Fund. So that's one way to shore up Social Security. Another way to shore up Medicare is to allow for negotiating drug prices, just as the VA does. The Congressional Budget Office says if we negotiated drug prices for Medicare, if it were able to do that, that would save about $110 billion. So that's how I am going to protect Social Security and Medicare for our age, for you, Bob, and for all of us.
Thank you. The next question comes to you first, Mr. Buckley. We have a question from a viewer, this time from Renata Poor of Charleston, who is the Director of Healthcare Policy at the organization West Virginians for Affordable Healthcare. Renata asks about a program that originated by Senator Jay Rockefeller, who currently holds the seat that you all are campaigning for. She says the Children's Health Insurance Program, known as CHIP, will run out of funding on September 30th, 2015, unless Congress passes legislation to continue funding through 2019. Will you support the continued funding of CHIP?
Well, first I'd like to say I think it'd be wonderful for a Buckley to succeed a Rockefeller in the United States Senate. So I'm pushing for that outcome. On this program, no, I think she refers to a program that's running out of funding. Guess what? The federal government has run out of funding. The federal government's coffers are empty. Our national debt is huge and almost unfathomable. It's out of control. We need to cut things back, and we need to solve these problems at the local level, not always turning to the federal government like there's some cupboard of extra dollars that we can reach our hand into and spend here and there. The needs are there, but if we reduce taxes and spending at the federal level, people will have more money in their own pockets to solve their problems based on their priorities. We will get more efficient solutions to the needs of people among our families and in our communities to help each other. I favor less federal government, not more.
Mr. Baber, the question comes to you.
Well, to me, it's a no-brainer that we should refund CHIP, and I want to say furthermore that I support universal health care for everyone in the United States as a right. Right now, we have health care for the rich and for the upper middle class, and then when you get to the lower middle class, good luck, you're on your own. That's just completely wrong, and it's, I'll never forget, you know, after the 2008 blow-up, which was made by the federal government not watching the banks and trusting them, I talked to a vet and I said, did your business go down? And he said, no, not really. He said, for a little while it did, but then it all came back when everybody whose dog was ill, but they didn't think they were too ill, put off coming to see me until their dogs were really sick. Then they had to spend all that extra money. So in a sense, yeah, you can, the Republicans are notorious for this. They could save a little money on Pell Grants right now. Yank Pell Grants and students won't have that money, and the budget deficit will go down. But for the long haul, we'll have a lot less college graduates. They won't be competing in the world. Less money will be made. Less taxes will come in. It's an investment strategy. We need to invest in the United States' future.
Thank you, Mr. Baber. I'm sorry, that's your time. Secretary Tennant, the question is about CHIP.
Yes, I will support extending funding of the CHIP program. And I will do this because I know personally what it is like to go without health insurance. And I tell the story of my daughter Delaney because unfortunately it's an all too common story in West Virginia. And many folks know that my daughter Delaney had open heart surgery when she was a week old. Folks across West Virginia prayed for her, and those prayers were answered. The surgery saved her life. But when my husband and I started our business and wanted to buy insurance for our family and for the business, she was denied. They said they would cover me and him, but they would not cover her because she had a pre-existing condition. And I tell that story because 800,000 West Virginians have pre-existing conditions. So if we can make sure that there is access to health care and affordable health care, I am going to do that. And I will not allow us to go back to the days when those insurance companies could deny insurance because of a pre-existing condition.
Mr. Hudok.
I agree with John. I think we have to shift how we do things. The government is just diminishing returns. You never get back what you give to the government. And charity is the role of people, churches, and private organizations. And we have the most charitable nation in the world. What we need to do is create a system where people do well because the government isn't holding them down. We need free enterprise. We need less government. And who's going to trust a government that for 40 years operated the Tuskegee syphilis program where they actually gave people syphilis, didn't treat them, and just to see what they would do? Our government has done some terrible things, and I think less government, give the responsibility to the people. Our founders said that our form of government was only sufficient for a self-governing people. And what we've done is turn to the government to be our nanny and become a nanny state, and it's not good.
Mr. Baber, the next question comes to you first. September seasonally adjusted unemployment numbers were released earlier this week, and West Virginia sits at 6.6%, which translates to nearly 53,000 West Virginians. Give me one concrete example of a way you could affect job growth in West Virginia as its senator.
Well, I think that we should change the severance tax laws on all the extraction industries, both fracking and coal, and raise the severance tax so that we can take that money and begin retraining programs, for example, in the southern coal fields. Our southern coal fields are going to continue to experience decline in the coal fields, as is all of Appalachia. We're having a hard time competing with that huge mine in the Powder River Basin in Montana, in Wyoming. And so I support green jobs. I think I support technology, entrepreneurship. I think we need to look to the future. I've been far too much who loves coal the most. Coal is in decline. Coal is history. It's going to be with us for a while. I understand 98% right now of our electricity in this room is coming from coal. I'm not anti-coal, but I definitely am for pivoting from coal and from natural gas and using those to begin to diversify and create the green energy jobs of the future, and for West Virginia.
Secretary, one example of a way you could incite job growth.
Ashton, what I look at are small businesses, and John Deskins, who is the WVU economist, even said this, that our job creation is going to come from small businesses in West Virginia. I'm a small business owner myself, so I look at things through the eyes of a small business, especially when it's one or two people who are running the business. And that's why in the Secretary of State's office, I've made it easier to do business in West Virginia, streamlined so business could file their annual reports more efficiently, so they could focus on their business, not paperwork. I've cut fees as well for our businesses. And I know that the best thing that businesses could do is government to get out of the way. That's why I've cut those fees. Now, Congresswoman Capito, if she were here, she chose not to be here, she has wanted to increase fees on businesses. The swipe fees that we pay every time we use a credit card or debit card, there is a charge to that, and it's either the customer or the business, and the business has been paying. She sided with Wells Fargo when they spent $6 million lobbying to increase those fees on our small businesses. I will stand up for our businesses.
Mr. Hudok.
Yes, I think we need fair trade, not free trade. We need to reinstitute tariffs and protect our country, our workers, our businesses from slave labor products from places like China and places like that. At one time, that's mainly how the government was financed, was through tariffs. And I believe in free trade within the country, but you can't trade with a communist nation like China with slave labor on an equal basis unless you drop your level of protection, of wages, those kind of things. So I'm for reinstituting tariffs for fair trade on an international basis.
Mr. Buckley.
I think we need to free the economy, not put more rules and regulations of any kind. If we cut spending, cut taxes, and cut regulations at the federal level, it will lead to an economic renaissance that would make the Reagan economic boom be a piker. John Kennedy did that in the early 1960s. Ronald Reagan did it in the 1980s. That's what we need to revitalize our economy. We would have a renaissance of job growth and entrepreneurialism and economic mobility upward. That's the solution, not more government.
Secretary, the final question comes to you first.
Okay.
Should you win the U.S. Senate seat in the next 6 years, what will be the signature accomplishment that you will campaign on for re-election?
The signature accomplishment, that's a great question. And what I will campaign on for re-election in the next 6 years is that I have helped to bring good paying jobs to West Virginia and expand the economy. And how we do that is by investing in the research and technology that is already taking place here in West Virginia. You know, West Virginians are the greatest innovators. And we have grown up like that. I know on the farm when we wanted something, we either saved for it, made it ourselves, or did without. And so that same spirit that we have here in West Virginia, we should be investing in that for research, technology, and have a resurgence of our manufacturing, and take that research that we're doing in the labs and take it and make it and turn it into manufacturing and have another wave of good paying jobs, like with 3D printing that we're already doing here in West Virginia at the Robert C. Byrd Institute. And so investment into the research now will pay dividends later.
Mr. Hudok, your signature accomplishment in 6 years.
I would like to free the churches. West Virginia Constitution says churches shall not incorporate. We have incorporated churches which are now under IRS control. And what we're seeing in Texas is going to come to West Virginia. And the way churches got into corporation was LBJ had a vendetta against the churches. And so he wrote it into a spending bill and got IRS code and persuaded the churches, who are actually non-taxable, to take a tax exemption of 501c3. We have a moral meltdown in this country. We need to free the churches. If we don't have moral people, we won't have a moral government. You can't legislate morality. Morality comes from the churches, and that's why I'm working with Patrick Morrissey to say, hey, we got a problem here in West Virginia. The Constitution says you can't incorporate. Churches are incorporated, and now they're being told what they can say and what they can't say, and they need to be freed. It was the Black Brigade of the American Revolution, which was the American pastors, which gave us the freedoms we have today by fighting a tyrannical system and saying God's in control.
Mr. Buckley, your accomplishment that you'll campaign on.
If I could be known for anything else, it would be to have accomplished being a bridge between right and left and conservative and liberal. We've bemoaned lately the dearth of conservative Democrats and the dearth of liberal Republicans and the coalitions that used to exist in the Congress to compromise and solve problems. The new coalition that's building is going to be the coalition between libertarian-oriented Democrats and libertarian-oriented Republicans. And who better to bring those two together with a lot of common principles than a libertarian? If I could accomplish that in the U.S. Senate, I think I would be doing great things for the future of American politics and solving problems consistent with small government and individual liberty.
Mr. Baber.
I think John said something important here, and that's the word compromise. You know, that's what politics actually is. It's people coming together. They may have differences. We have differences here, but I suspect that there are many problems that we could sit down and say, you know what, we disagree about this, we disagree about that, but what is the common ground that we accept that will move us forward? That's what we don't have anymore. What we've got is Republicans and Democrats taking stances, throwing pies at each other, putting on quite a show, and if we think we've had gridlock now, just wait till Mitch McConnell becomes the head of the Senate. The next 2 years will be insanely gridlocked. So my legacy, I would hope if I was elected, would be to create new jobs in entrepreneurship, small business, technology, solar energy, bringing our troops home and building our own infrastructure right here in the United States, taking care of ourselves. It's time.
Thank you. We'll move now to our final section, a 4-minute open discussion. In this round, we talked about Social Security and Medicare, the CHIP program, job growth. Does anyone have any rebuttal, anything that they would like to add to the conversation?
Well, I think on social programs, everyone is of one mind that the goal is to help people who are in need. The goal is to help families thrive, communities thrive, people have jobs, and help people who are in need. The question is, what is the mechanism to do that? Which program is going to help? My approach is different. I favor smaller government and fewer of these top-down programs. But it doesn't mean that I or anyone here cares any less about actually helping people in need. And that's a theme that's important as we debate these issues, the four of us who deign to come here. As we debate these issues, we have that in common. We want to help people and make our communities better.
Secretary, you started to say something.
You know, I mean, and I was just going to hop off on what John says. It's about priorities. You're right. You know, where do we get to a situation where it's not a handout? People don't want a handout; they'll take a hand up, and that's where I think is so important. We didn't mention education, and for me, I'm from a family of teachers. Bob, you're a professor now, but I'm from a family of teachers, and I recognize that it starts at the foundation. And when we talk about investments, and I talk about investment in resource, we need investment in our people, and for that, it comes in early childhood education. It comes in Head Start, and we know that when a child has exposure to a good quality Head Start or early childhood education program, they're less likely to drop out of school, they're less likely to be arrested, then that means they're less likely to be dependent on government services later on in life. Invest now, don't pay it as much later. And so that's where I see the clear distinction between me and our opponent who is not here, who chose not to answer to the people of West Virginia. You know why? Because she cut those critical programs, not just one time, but 4 times. Congresswoman Capito voted to cut Head Start and cut 1,200 West Virginia children from that critical program. And the worst part of it is she's giving the priorities that we're talking about. It's not balancing the budget. It's going to give tax breaks to millionaires. So that's why, you know, there's nobody more serious about balancing a budget and cutting a budget than I am, but it's about priorities, and my priority is West Virginia.
Let's bring Mr. Hudok. You had some notes written down.
Yeah, since you brought up public education, and I've taught for 40 years,
Right.
It needs to be public education, not government education. We need to get the federal government out of education, totally. No child left behind, no Common Core, zero, no Michelle Obama food police standing at the food lines, okay? We need public education where the public takes responsibility. That's the problem. We have to take public responsibility. People have to be responsible. The higher we get and the more we trust in government, the less strong and rugged, and we're not like the people that founded this nation. So, and before the federal government got into education, the United States was #1 in education. Now we're way down the list. And it's because, as John said, anytime you have the federal government involved, and they have very few limited things that they're supposed to do, like the border, and they're not even doing that. Let's get the government doing what they're supposed to do and get them out of order.
Before we run out of time, Mr. Baber, I want to bring you into the conversation. I realize you work in higher education, but how do you feel about the issues that Mr. Hudok brought up about No Child Left Behind and now Common Core?
Well, Common Core, I think that's still unfolding. I think establishing national, good, rational standards is not necessarily a bad thing. The states have the option of accepting or not accepting it, but I want to talk about higher education because I really know about that. Pell Grants. Capitol has voted against them, and the Republicans want to cut them. I would tell you right now that if Pell Grants get cut, every college and university in the state of West Virginia will shutter its doors within a year. That is the lifeblood of those institutions, and not just West Virginia, the whole country. So do we really want to close our colleges and universities? I don't think so. And again, I have to come back and say that what trumps all of our discussions here today, John and I disagree on this, but I do not see free speech as big money. Campaign finance reform is, all these other issues we're talking about will get washed away in the tsunami of big money if we do not get campaign finance reform. We must have it.
Thank you, Mr. Baber. We're going to move now to closing statements. Each candidate has a minute and a half to address you, the audience. One last time, our speaking order was determined before our broadcast, and we begin with you, Mr. Hudok.
I get to go first again, don't I? Yes. We can't have politics as usual. The people have to look and vote for someone that they agree with. You're never going to get what you want if you don't vote for it. If you compromise, that's what you get, a compromise. And then when you compromise again, you're even further from what you want. So don't pick a winner. pick a person who says and will do and has stood up like I have as a school teacher. I had to go to the Supreme Court to get my job back because I said we were going into a police state. Look at the DMV and how you're treated now. For 8 years, I drove without a driver's license to get a non-biometric driver's license where my face was not mapped and put in a criminal international database, Interpol, that goes to communist countries. Okay? I'm losing that again because that was actually granted by then Governor Manchin, and it was taken away by Governor Tomlin. So I'm fighting that issue again. I believe in rights. I will stand up for rights. I'm not politically correct. I will not let that stop me. I think a lot of people are afraid of political correctness, and I think that's a way to control people. So do the right thing. Vote for someone you believe in and someone who has a history of standing for what they believe and non-compromising. Thank you.
Mr. Buckley, you're next.
Thank you very much. I think our political system has degenerated into a quest for power for its own sake on the part of too many people in public office, and it's time to change that. I know people in the public that I've talked to throughout this campaign at fairs and festivals and parades are so disgusted with politics as usual. And ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a change, and this year is the opportunity to do it. My Republican opponent, as I mentioned, is a big government, big business type of Republican, and I'm a Ronald Reagan fan. My view of Secretary Tennant's positions is I believe she's campaigning on issues of economic class warfare, and I don't think that does anything that help grow the government. Each of the two major candidates in this race, in their own way, are proponents of more government. I'm a proponent of less government and more liberty. So in this race, this year, our state, 5 candidates, there's one choice, consistent choice for smaller government and personal freedom, and I hope people will consider voting for John Buckley for United States Senate. Thank you.
Secretary, you're next.
Well, thank you very much, Ashton. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, most importantly, for those of you at home who are watching, because this race is about you and the future that you want for your families. You know me. You know that I grew up on a farm in Marion County, the youngest of 7 children, where we had 9 people in a house with 1 bathroom. And you know my record. You know that I won't stand up to politics, or I will stand up to politics as usual in Washington, because I've stood up to politics as usual here in Charleston too. Because in 2010, as Secretary of State, when 3 Democratic elected officials tried to steal an election, I led the investigation that put them behind bars. 3 members of my own party in federal prison because I don't answer to a party, I answer to the people of West Virginia. And yes, I cut my budget. I saved money and I gave back $3 million to the taxpayers. I'm proud of the endorsements and the support that I have all over the state, from folks like Senator Manchin and Senator Rockefeller, United Mine Workers, the coal miners, the teachers, the seniors, and the AFL-CIO. And I do want to thank my fellow candidates for being here, because you came here to answer questions, and I think that it's very important to recognize who is not here. Because here's an important point. For the past year, Congresswoman Capito has tried to make this a race about Washington politicians, but yet she refuses to be here today to answer tough questions that were impacting West Virginians and how her votes have hurt West Virginians. So that tells you about her priorities. My priority is you, because your story is my story. I know what it's like to work a minimum wage job. I know what it's like to run a small business, and I know what it's like to send a husband to war. And I'm asking to be your voice in the United States Senate.
Thank you. Mr. Baber.
I too want to thank my fellow candidates for coming today and for you all hosting us. It's been quite wonderful. I'm a common man who loves West Virginia. I can tell you that if I was to go to the United States Senate, every vote, every opportunity I had to help the common people, I would try to do so. I'm an environmentalist. I believe we need to have balance between economic development, but the environment too. So I'm a green person. But I'm a good person, and I would ask for your vote and your support. I offer an alternative, probably the greenest alternative here. I'm a person that's looking towards the future and not backwards for West Virginia and for the country. So thank you for having me.
Candidates, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
This has been a debate between the candidates on the ballot for United States Senate. Early voting begins October 22nd. Election Day is November 4th. I'm Ashton Marra, and I thank you for joining us. Thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Nice job. Good job, you guys.
Thank you.
I wanted to hear.